In a small, quiet county courthouse, the air buzzed with anticipation. The room was filled with people, some curious onlookers, others reporters eager to capture every detail of what promised to be a dramatic day. At the center of it all sat Sergeant Marcus Hale, a man whose reputation preceded him. Known for his tough demeanor and unyielding attitude, Hale had spent decades as a police officer in the town, earning both respect and resentment from the community. Today, however, he wasn't wearing his uniform or standing behind the shield of authority. Instead, he sat stiffly at the defense table, dressed in a suit that looked slightly too tight, his face etched with frustration. The case against Hale stemmed from an incident that had gone viral on social media just months earlier. During a routine traffic stop, things had escalated quickly. Witnesses claimed they saw Hale use unnecessary force against a young man, pinning him to the ground, while shouting accusations laced with anger. The video, captured by a bystander, painted a troubling picture. It showed Hale's aggressive behavior and raised questions about whether his actions were motivated by something deeper than just enforcing the law. The public outcry was immediate, and soon federal authorities stepped in to investigate potential civil rights violations. Leading the prosecution was Deputy Director Elena Vasquez of the FBI, a woman whose name carried weight far beyond the walls of this courtroom. Tall and poised, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing, Vasquez commanded attention without saying a word. She moved with purpose, her presence radiating confidence and authority. For years, she had worked tirelessly to address issues of misconduct within law enforcement, earning praise from advocates and criticism from those who felt she was overstepping boundaries. To some, she represented progress. To others, like Hale, she symbolized interference. As the trial began, the atmosphere grew tense. The judge, an older man with thinning gray hair and a no-nonsense expression, instructed everyone to remain respectful throughout the proceedings. But even before the first piece of evidence was presented, it was clear that Hale harbored deep resentment toward Vasquez. He muttered under his breath, rolling his eyes whenever she spoke. His lawyer tried to calm him down, but Hale couldn't hide his disdain. "They send someone like her to come here and tell us how to do our jobs?" he whispered loudly enough for nearby spectators to hear. "City folks think they know everything." Vasquez ignored the comments, focusing instead on laying out her case. She started by presenting surveillance footage taken during the traffic stop. On the screen, the scene unfolded frame by frame. Hale approaching the car, speaking briefly with the driver, then suddenly escalating the situation. The young man inside the vehicle appeared confused, raising his hands in surrender. Yet Hale continued to shout and physically restrain him. The video ended abruptly, leaving the courtroom silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Hale shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact with the screen. When Vasquez turned to face the jury, her tone was calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "what we see here is not just an isolated act of poor judgment. This is a pattern, a disregard for the principles of fairness and humanity that are meant to guide those entrusted with protecting our communities." Her words hung in the air, resonating with some and infuriating others. Throughout the morning, Vasquez methodically built her argument. She called witnesses to testify, neighbors who had seen the altercation, experts who analyzed the legality of Hale's actions, and even former colleagues who hesitantly admitted to similar concerns about his temperament. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the portrait of a man who believed himself untouchable, immune to consequences because of his badge. For Hale, sitting through this parade of accusations was unbearable. He clenched his fists under the table, his knuckles turning white. His lawyer did his best to challenge Vasquez's points, asking pointed questions designed to cast doubt on the credibility of the witnesses. But no matter how hard he pushed back, Vasquez remained unshaken. She answered each question with clarity and precision, never losing her composure. By lunchtime, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Spectators whispered among themselves, speculating about how the rest of the day would unfold. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, already drafting headlines in their minds. And Hale, He paced outside the building, chain-smoking cigarettes and muttering angrily to anyone who would listen. "This isn't justice," he growled to his lawyer. "It's a witch hunt." Inside, Vasquez took a moment to gather her thoughts. She knew the stakes were high, not just for this case, but for the broader message it sent about accountability and law enforcement. As she sipped water and reviewed her notes, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. This wasn't just about one man's actions. It was about setting a precedent, showing that no one, regardless of rank or title, was above scrutiny. With renewed determination, she prepared for the afternoon session, knowing full well that the battle was far from over. Little did anyone know, the most explosive moment of the trial was still to come. As the afternoon session resumed, the courtroom felt heavier, as if the weight of unresolved tensions had settled over everyone like a thick fog. The air conditioning hummed faintly in the background, doing little to ease the stifling atmosphere. Deputy Director Elena Vasquez returned to the stand, her posture confident but calm. She carried a stack of documents and digital evidence, ready to present the final pieces of her case against Sergeant Marcus Hale. The jury leaned forward slightly, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. Even the judge seemed more alert, his pen poised to jot down notes. Vasquez began by summarizing the key points she had already established. She reminded the court of the video footage showing Hale's aggressive behavior during the traffic stop, emphasizing how it contradicted standard police protocols. Then she introduced new evidence, audio recordings from the dashboard camera inside Hale's patrol car. As the audio played, the courtroom fell silent. The voices were clear. Hale's raised tone dominated the exchange, while the young man he had detained sounded increasingly panicked. "Why are you doing this?" the man asked repeatedly, his voice trembling. Hale's response was sharp and dismissive. "You think you're special? You don't get to question me." The impact of the recording was immediate. Murmurs rippled through the gallery and several jurors exchanged uneasy glances. Vasquez paused, letting the moment sink in before continuing. "This is not just about one incident," she said, her voice steady but charged with conviction. "It's about the mindset that allows such behavior to occur and continue unchecked." Her words resonated deeply, especially when she pointed out patterns in Hale's past conduct. Internal reports and complaints filed by citizens painted a troubling picture of a man who often operated on the edge of professionalism, sometimes crossing into outright hostility. Hale, sitting at the defense table, grew visibly agitated. His face flushed red and his jaw tightened as Vasquez spoke. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, whispering something to his lawyer, who nodded but didn't interrupt. When it came time for cross-examination, Hale's attorney stood up, attempting to poke holes in Vasquez's arguments. He questioned the authenticity of the recordings, suggested witnesses might have exaggerated their accounts, and even implied that Vasquez herself had ulterior motives for pursuing the case so aggressively. But Vasquez remained composed, answering each challenge with clarity and precision. Her responses dismantled every attempt to discredit her case, leaving Hale's lawyer looking increasingly flustered. Despite these efforts, Hale's frustration boiled over. As Vasquez explained the broader implications of his actions, how they undermined public trust in law enforcement and perpetuated cycles of fear and resentment, he couldn't stay silent any longer. Leaning forward, he muttered loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "She doesn't know what she's talking about, thinks she can waltz in here and lecture us." His lawyer shot him a warning glance, but Hale ignored it. His anger simmered just below the surface, threatening to erupt. Then came the moment that would change everything. During a particularly heated exchange between Vasquez and Hale's attorney, Hale finally snapped. Interrupting mid-question, he blurted out, "You people always stick your noses where they don't belong." His voice was loud and accusatory, cutting through the room like a knife. Gasps echoed from the spectators, and the judge slammed his gavel down hard, demanding order. But Hale wasn't done. Turning directly toward Vasquez, he added, "And you think you're better than everyone else, don't you? Coming here to tell real cops how to do their jobs." The courtroom froze. Even the reporters stopped typing, their eyes wide with shock. Vasquez, however, didn't flinch. She met Hale's glare with an unwavering gaze, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, there was only silence, a collective holding of breath as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Judge Thompson, a no-nonsense figure known for maintaining strict decorum, leaned forward in his chair. His voice boomed across the room. "Sergeant Hale, I will not tolerate such outbursts in my courtroom. Apologize immediately or face consequences." The command hung in the air, heavy and unyielding, but Hale refused to back down. Instead, he doubled down, his tone laced with defiance. "I'm not apologizing to anyone, especially not to her." His words carried an unmistakable edge, though he stopped short of using language that could be deemed explicitly hateful. Still, the implication was clear and the damage was done. The room erupted into murmurs again, some people shaking their heads in disbelief while others whispered urgently to their neighbors. Vasquez, still standing tall, turned to the judge. Her voice was calm but firm as she addressed the bench. "Your Honor, given the blatant disrespect and insubordination displayed here today, I request that Sergeant Hale be held in contempt of court. His behavior undermines the integrity of these proceedings and sets a dangerous precedent." Her words carried authority, and the judge nodded thoughtfully, considering her request. For a fleeting second, Hale seemed to realize the gravity of his actions. His bravado faltered, and he glanced around the room, perhaps hoping for support from someone, anyone. But none came. His lawyer looked away, clearly embarrassed by his client's behavior. The spectators who had once sympathized with Hale now appeared uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as if trying to distance themselves from the spectacle unfolding before them. Judge Thompson wasted no time deliberating. With a stern expression, he declared, "Sergeant Hale, you are hereby held in contempt of court. Bailiffs, please escort him from the premises until further notice." 2 bailiffs stepped forward, their movements deliberate and professional. They approached Hale, who initially resisted, sputtering protests about unfair treatment and federal interference. But resistance was futile. Within moments, he was on his feet, being led toward the exit. As Hale disappeared through the doors, the courtroom exhaled collectively. Some clapped softly, though the judge quickly silenced them with another stern rap of his gavel. Vasquez returned to her seat, her expression neutral, but her mind undoubtedly racing. She knew this incident would reverberate far beyond the confines of this room, sparking conversations about accountability, respect, and the responsibilities of those in positions of power. For the first time that day, the tension in the courtroom began to ease, but only slightly. Everyone present understood that this trial had taken a dramatic turn, one that would shape its outcome and leave a lasting impression on all who witnessed it. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of shock and disbelief as Sergeant Marcus Hale was escorted out, his protests fading into the distance. For a moment, no one moved. The judge sat back in his chair, his face stern but also weary, as if he had just witnessed something both inevitable and deeply unsettling. Deputy Director Elena Vasquez remained seated, her hands resting lightly on the table in front of her. She didn't look triumphant or vindicated, just resolute, as though this was simply another step in the long process of seeking justice. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. "This court will take a short recess to allow all parties to regroup," he announced, his voice firm but measured. "We will reconvene in 30 minutes. With that, he rose from his seat and exited through the door behind the bench, leaving the rest of the courtroom to grapple with what had just happened. As soon as the judge left, the room erupted into hushed conversations. Reporters scrambled to type updates for their editors, while spectators debated whether Hale's outburst had been justified or completely out of line. Some sympathized with him, arguing that the pressure of being scrutinized by federal authorities must have pushed him too far. Others sided with Vasquez, praising her composure and professionalism in the face of such blatant disrespect. Amidst the chatter, Vasquez gathered her notes and quietly stepped out of the courtroom, heading toward a small conference room down the hall. Inside the conference room, Vasquez took a deep breath, allowing herself a rare moment of reflection. She had known this case would be challenging, but she hadn't anticipated the level of hostility Hale would display. Still, she reminded herself why she was here: to ensure accountability and uphold the principles of fairness and equality. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications, but she ignored them for now, focusing instead on preparing for the next phase of the trial. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, news of Hale's removal spread like wildfire. Local media outlets picked up the story almost instantly, broadcasting live updates to an audience hungry for details. Social media platforms lit up with reactions, ranging from outrage to applause. Hashtags related to the case began trending nationwide, drawing attention not only to Hale's behavior, but also to broader issues surrounding law enforcement accountability. Protesters started gathering near the courthouse, holding signs that read "Justice over power" and "Accountability now." Their chants echoed through the streets, adding another layer of intensity to the day's events. Back inside the courtroom, when the session resumed, the atmosphere felt different. There was a sense of inevitability hanging in the air, as if everyone knew the trial had reached a turning point. Judge Thompson re-entered and called the room to order, his expression unchanged, but his tone firmer than before. "Let the record show that Sergeant Marcus Hale has been held in contempt of court and is currently under custody pending further review," he stated. "We will proceed with the remaining testimonies." Vasquez returned to the stand, her presence commanding yet composed. She continued presenting her case, laying out additional evidence that reinforced her earlier arguments. This time, however, there was an unspoken shift in the dynamics of the room. The jury seemed more attentive, leaning forward slightly as they absorbed each detail. Even Hale's lawyer appeared less combative, perhaps realizing that his client's outburst had damaged their defense irreparably. One particularly compelling piece of evidence came from a former colleague of Hale's, a retired officer who had worked alongside him for years. The man, now in his late 60s, walked slowly to the witness stand, leaning heavily on a cane. His testimony painted a vivid picture of Hale's temperament over the years. "He always thought he was above the rules," the retired officer said, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "There were times when I saw him treat people differently based on, well, let's just say it wasn't always fair." The implication hung in the air, resonating with everyone present. Hale's lawyer tried to challenge the credibility of the witness, suggesting bias or exaggeration, but the retired officer held his ground. "I'm not saying this because I have anything against Marcus," he continued. "I'm saying it because it's true, and if we don't speak up now, nothing will change." By the end of the day, the prosecution's case felt nearly airtight. Vasquez wrapped up her presentation with a closing statement that was both powerful and poignant. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "this case is about more than one individual. It's about the trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. When that trust is broken, when officers abuse their power, it affects us all. Today you have the opportunity to send a message that no one is above the law, regardless of their position or title." Her words lingered in the courtroom long after she finished speaking. The jury exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, others looking pensively at their notes. Judge Thompson thanked everyone for their patience and announced that closing arguments would begin the following morning. As the court adjourned, Vasquez packed up her materials, her expression calm but reflective. She knew the hardest part was still ahead, the deliberation, but she also felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Whatever the outcome, she had done everything in her power to present the truth. Outside, the crowd of protesters had grown larger, their voices louder and more united. Among them were members of the young man's family, the same individual Hale had detained during the traffic stop that sparked the entire case. They stood together, holding photos of their loved one and chanting slogans calling for justice. Cameras flashed as reporters interviewed them, capturing raw emotions that underscored the human cost of unchecked authority. That evening, news channels across the country covered the dramatic events of the day. Analysts debated the significance of Hale's outburst and its potential impact on public perception of law enforcement. Social media users shared clips of Vasquez's closing statement, praising her eloquence and determination. Meanwhile, Hale remained in custody, reportedly refusing to speak to anyone except his lawyer. Rumors swirled about whether he might attempt to appeal the contempt charge, but legal experts agreed that his options were limited. For Vasquez, the night was far from restful. She spent hours reviewing case files and strategizing with her team, anticipating every possible angle the defense might take during closing arguments. Yet, even amidst the pressure, she allowed herself a brief moment of gratitude for her colleagues, for the witnesses who had come forward, and for the countless individuals advocating for change outside the courthouse walls. As dawn broke the next morning, the courthouse was once again packed with spectators eager to see how the final chapter of the trial would unfold. The energy in the room was electric, charged with anticipation and hope. For many, this wasn't just about convicting or acquitting one man. It was about reaffirming the values that should guide those entrusted with protecting society. And as the proceedings resumed, it became clear that the events of the previous day had set the stage for a verdict that could resonate far beyond the confines of the courtroom. The morning sun filtered through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the room as the final day of the trial began. The air was thick with anticipation, and every seat in the gallery was occupied. Spectators whispered among themselves, their voices a low hum that filled the space until Judge Thompson entered and called for silence. His gavel struck once, sharp and authoritative, signaling the start of closing arguments. This was it, the moment when both sides would make their final appeals to the jury, hoping to sway their decision one way or the other. Deputy Director Elena Vasquez rose first, her presence commanding but calm. She stood at the podium, adjusting her notes briefly before looking directly at the jurors. Her opening words were simple yet powerful. Ladies and gentlemen, today you hold not just the fate of one man in your hands, but the future of trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. She paused, letting the weight of her statement sink in. Then she launched into her argument, weaving together the evidence presented over the past days into a cohesive narrative. Vasquez recounted the video footage of the traffic stop, highlighting how Hale's actions deviated from standard protocol. She replayed snippets of the audio recording, emphasizing the fear in the young man's voice and the aggression in Hale's tone. This wasn't an isolated incident, she reminded the jury. It was part of a pattern of behavior that disrespects not only the individuals involved but also the badge he swore to honor. Her voice carried conviction without veering into hostility, striking a balance that kept the jurors engaged. She then turned to the testimonies of witnesses, particularly the retired officer who had worked alongside Hale for years. Even those who once stood by his side have come forward to say enough is enough, she said, gesturing toward the gallery where the retired officer sat quietly. They understand that protecting the integrity of law enforcement means holding everyone accountable, even those within its ranks. Vasquez concluded her argument with a plea for justice, framing the case as more than just about one individual. Your verdict will send a message, she said, her eyes scanning the jury members one by one. Will we tolerate abuse of power, or will we stand firm in our belief that no one is above the law? With that, she returned to her seat, her expression unreadable but her posture confident. Next, it was Hale's lawyer's turn. He approached the podium with determination, attempting to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice smooth and practiced. What you've seen here isn't the full picture. My client made mistakes, yes, but does that mean he deserves to be vilified? To lose everything he's worked for? He tried to paint Hale as a victim of circumstance, arguing that the stress of modern policing had pushed him too far. He's human, the lawyer insisted, and humans make errors. But his defense struggled to gain traction. Every time he attempted to downplay Hale's actions, Vasquez's earlier arguments loomed larger in contrast. When he questioned the credibility of certain witnesses, the jury seemed unconvinced, perhaps remembering the retired officer's heartfelt testimony. By the time he finished speaking, there was a palpable sense that his efforts had fallen short. As the judge instructed the jury on their responsibilities, the courtroom fell silent. The 12 men and women filed out, carrying the burden of deciding Hale's fate. For hours, they deliberated behind closed doors, their discussions intense and impassioned. Outside the jury room, the tension was unbearable. Reporters camped out in the hallway, refreshing their phones endlessly for updates. Protesters continued their chants outside, their voices growing louder as the wait dragged on. Finally, after nearly 6 hours, the jury returned. Their faces gave nothing away as they took their seats. Judge Thompson asked the foreperson to deliver the verdict. The woman stood, her hands trembling slightly as she held the slip of paper. "We find the defendant, Sergeant Marcus Hale, guilty on all counts," she announced, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Some spectators clapped softly before being silenced by the judge's stern glance. Others simply stared in stunned silence, absorbing the enormity of the decision. Hale, sitting stoically beside his lawyer, showed no visible reaction, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. The judge proceeded to sentence Hale, taking into account the severity of his actions and the lack of remorse he had shown throughout the trial. "Sergeant Hale," Judge Thompson said, his tone grave, "you have betrayed the very principles you swore to uphold. For this, you are hereby sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, stripped of your badge, and permanently barred from serving in any capacity within law enforcement." The gavel struck again, sealing Hale's fate. In the days that followed, the fallout from the trial dominated headlines nationwide. Media outlets dissected every aspect of the case, praising Vasquez's handling of the prosecution while scrutinizing Hale's downfall. Social media remained ablaze with reactions, many celebrating the verdict as a victory for accountability, while others criticized the perceived harshness of the sentence. Regardless of personal opinions, the case sparked widespread conversations about reforming law enforcement practices and ensuring transparency. For Vasquez, the aftermath brought both challenges and opportunities. She received an outpouring of support from colleagues and advocates, along with invitations to speak at conferences and events focused on criminal justice reform. But she also faced backlash from critics who accused her of targeting law enforcement unfairly. Through it all, she remained steadfast, using her platform to advocate for systemic changes that prioritized fairness and integrity. Hale's life, meanwhile, unraveled completely. Stripped of his career and reputation, he retreated from public view, reportedly struggling to adjust to life without the authority he had once wielded. Former colleagues distanced themselves from him, unwilling to associate with someone whose actions had tarnished the profession they still valued. Internal investigations uncovered additional complaints against him, further solidifying the perception that his behavior had been part of a long-standing pattern rather than an isolated lapse in judgment. Back in the community, the verdict served as a catalyst for change. Local leaders organized town hall meetings to discuss ways to improve relations between residents and police officers. Activists pushed for reforms, including increased training on de-escalation techniques and bias awareness. The family of the young man detained during the traffic stop expressed relief and gratitude, saying the outcome gave them hope for a better future. For Deputy Director Vasquez, the case reinforced her belief in the importance of perseverance and courage. As she reflected on the trial in private moments, she acknowledged the weight of what had transpired, but also the progress it represented. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she told a reporter during a rare interview, "but every step forward matters. And sometimes, holding someone accountable is the first step toward building something better." Though the trial was over, its impact lingered. It became a touchstone for discussions about accountability, fairness, and the evolving relationship between law enforcement and society. For those who had witnessed it firsthand and for countless others following along, it was a reminder that justice, though imperfect, remains worth fighting for. Months had passed since the dramatic conclusion of Sergeant Marcus Hale's trial, but its reverberations continued to echo through the community and beyond. The courthouse where it all unfolded became a symbol, a place where accountability had been demanded and delivered. People still talked about that day, the tension in the room, the shock of Hale's outburst, and the unwavering resolve of Deputy Director Elena Vasquez. For many, it wasn't just a legal victory. It was a turning point, proof that even the most entrenched systems could be challenged and changed. For Vasquez, life returned to a semblance of normalcy, though her role as a public figure had grown significantly. She traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, universities, and community forums about the importance of integrity within law enforcement. Her speeches were not fiery or confrontational, but rather thoughtful and measured, focusing on solutions rather than blame. Accountability isn't punishment, she often said. It's an opportunity to grow, to learn from mistakes and build trust where it has been broken. Her message resonated deeply with audiences, especially young officers who were eager to redefine what policing meant in their communities. At one event, a rookie cop approached her after her talk, visibly nervous but determined. "I joined this job because I wanted to help people," he admitted, "but sometimes it feels like we're working against them instead of with them. What can I do differently?" Vasquez smiled warmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Start by listening," she replied. "Listen to the people you serve. Understand their fears, their frustrations, and their hopes. And remember, you wear the badge to protect, not to dominate." Back in the small county where the trial took place, things began to shift slowly but noticeably. Local leaders, inspired by the national attention the case had brought, implemented new policies aimed at rebuilding trust between residents and police officers. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers, and independent oversight committees were established to review complaints and incidents. Training programs focused on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques replaced outdated methods that prioritized force over communication. The family of the young man detained during the infamous traffic stop found solace in these changes. They attended town hall meetings, sharing their story and urging others to remain vigilant. "We don't want anyone else to feel powerless," the young man's mother said during one emotional speech. "This is about making sure every voice matters, not just ours but everyone's." Her words struck a chord, inspiring more people to get involved in advocacy efforts. As for Hale, his story faded from the spotlight, though whispers of his name occasionally surfaced in discussions about reform. Stripped of his badge and sentenced to prison, he struggled to adapt to his new reality. Behind bars, he kept mostly to himself, avoiding conversations about the trial or his past career. Some former colleagues visited him initially, but those visits dwindled over time. Without the shield of authority, Hale seemed diminished, a shadow of the imposing figure he once was. Yet his case served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that unchecked power could lead to ruin, both personal and professional. In the broader context, Hale's downfall contributed to a growing movement demanding accountability in law enforcement. Advocacy groups gained momentum, pushing for legislation that would address systemic issues within policing. Federal agencies collaborated with local departments to create guidelines ensuring transparency and fairness. While progress was slow and met with resistance in some quarters, there was undeniable momentum toward change. Vasquez played a key role in shaping this new era. Her work extended beyond prosecuting individual cases. She became a bridge between federal authorities and grassroots organizations. She listened to concerns from both sides, striving to find common ground. "Change starts with conversation," she told a group of activists during a roundtable discussion. "If we can sit down together, even when we disagree, we open the door to understanding." One of her proudest achievements came when Congress passed a landmark bill addressing police misconduct. Known informally as the Trust Act, the legislation mandated stricter oversight, increased funding for training programs, and protections for whistleblowers within law enforcement. Vasquez stood beside lawmakers as they signed the bill into law, her expression one of quiet pride. It wasn't perfect, no piece of legislation ever was, but it was a step forward, a foundation upon which future generations could build. Despite her success, Vasquez remained humble. She often reminded herself that she was just one person, part of a larger effort to create a fairer society. In quieter moments, she reflected on the trial that had catapulted her into the national spotlight. She thought about Hale's defiance, the courage of the witnesses who testified, and the resilience of the young man whose ordeal had sparked it all. Each of them had played a role in shaping the outcome, and each deserved recognition. Years later, the courthouse where the trial took place underwent renovations. A plaque was installed near the entrance commemorating the case and its significance. It read simply, "Justice begins with accountability." Visitors paused to read the inscription, some snapping photos, others reflecting silently. For those who remembered the trial, the plaque served as a reminder of how far they had come and how much further they still needed to go. Vasquez eventually retired from the FBI, leaving behind a legacy of dedication and perseverance. She moved to a small town, trading the hustle of city life for peaceful mornings spent tending to her garden. But she didn't disappear entirely. She wrote a memoir, detailing her experiences and offering insights for aspiring leaders in law enforcement. The book became a bestseller, praised for its honesty and wisdom. Readers admired her ability to balance strength with compassion, principles with pragmatism. On the anniversary of the trial, Vasquez returned to the courthouse where it all began. She walked through the now familiar halls, stopping briefly to touch the plaque before stepping outside. Reporters gathered around her, asking if she felt satisfied with the changes that had occurred since the trial. She smiled, her eyes soft but resolute. "Satisfaction isn't the goal," she said. "Progress is. And while we've made strides, our work is never truly done. Justice isn't a destination. It's a journey." With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Those who watched her go couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Here was a woman who had faced adversity head-on, who had stood firm in the face of hostility, and who had emerged not as a hero but as a catalyst for change. Her story, and the story of the trial, would continue to inspire others long after she was gone, a testament to the enduring power of accountability and the pursuit of justice.